to speed it up too much. You know, I get a little long-winded, and somebody probably will have to remind me that when it's 7:30. But what I want to look at and talk about is how God provides everything that we need to do everything that He wants us to do in our life. And then once He does that and prepares us for the certain task that we're being prepared for at that moment in time, and then He sends us to do that. So we're gonna take a look through the Bible and take a look at how He did that for His people in the Bible. And while we're doing this, what I want you to think about is how has He done that for you? Not just today, but over the last decade, the decade before that. That's getting about to when you were born, so we'll talk to everyone else but Jordan, and the decade before that. And then as far as me and Bill and George, several decades. And what was God doing? And what was He preparing us for? And how did that go? How did we do? And what is He preparing us for now? And so I want you to kind of start reflecting a little bit on how you can see where God was working, what God was doing, what you were able to do with God, and maybe where we are now. And then we'll pull this all together when we're done and sort of apply this to our life today and see if we're paying attention and maybe seeing what God is doing right now individually in each one of your lives, because it's going to be very, very different for each one of us. We are going to jump into Genesis. You won't have to follow me in the Bible, because I'm going to go through 4 different chapters in Genesis right into Exodus and just keep sliding through the Bible talking about different people. So, Adam and Eve, what did God provide? Everything. That one's easy, right? He created everything. Everything. The heavens and the earth. He literally made it perfect for them. He provided everything they needed: companionship, food, water. He even provided choices for them to make. And we know that story. We know a few choices were made there that didn't work out so good for them and is still playing out in our life. And then some of the decisions that they made after that didn't work out really for even their children, if you follow their children. And we'll follow those children forward until we get to Noah. And then we find that by then things have really gone downhill. In the mix, we see where God is blessing and preparing and doing things for that same line, that lineage. And just so you know, this lineage that we're following is basically going to take us from creation to the cross. So that's where we're headed. We see a lot of positive things in there. We see Enoch being blessed in such a way that he's taken to heaven. Methuselah is the oldest living human on record. And then we come forward just a little bit, and then we find Noah. Noah was favored. He was blessed with God's presence, but most of all, he recognized God's presence in his life. And up until the time he was about 500, which sounds funny saying that sometimes, even still today, the only thing that God actually had really provided for him was the simple fact that I am your God. And Noah believed it. And that's what makes him so very different at this point in time in the Bible, is he believed. Basically, he was literally the only person on the face of the earth at the time that truly believed God was who God was. And God blessed him for that. We know that Noah was very obedient. He provided everything that he needed. He provided the 3 sons, their families, and 100 years, more or less, to build an ark and preach the gospel. Now, I don't know about you, but it makes me nervous to even fill in for Gary on Wednesdays. I can't imagine preaching for 100 years and not one person listened. That would be hard. But he never gave up and he never quit. And of course, we know the end of that story and what took place there. Comes off the ark, begins to repopulate the earth. Things sort of immediately start going downhill again, even with Noah's children, except for Shem. And we see that he makes a little bit better effort. We creep a little bit deeper into Genesis and we find Abram. And here's where it all begins. God calls Abram and sets him apart. God said, go. He went. He didn't ask where or why. God just said, go. And he went. Now, as you know, Gary's been talking about this particular spot in the Bible for quite a while now. We know that Abraham didn't do such a good job all the time at what he was asked to do. He made some very serious mistakes. But here's some of the provisions that God provided. He sent him a son. Abraham asked for a son. God sent him a son. God asked for the son back. Abraham obeyed. God provided a ram. God is always providing and asking us things at the same time to see where our heart is. He needs to know where our heart is. He can't just be a genie in the sky that provides and provides and provides. He will provide, but He is always going to check the condition of our heart. Every one of God's people are unique and called for a purpose. And keep that in mind, because every single one of these people that we're going to talk about, I want you to kind of listen to their story and reflect back on it and sort of see if any of these stories run parallel with your story. Anything at all. Now, I'm not saying any of us could compare to any of these monumental people in the Bible, but their stories are similar to our stories. And the walk that we've walked and some of the things that we've lived through. So we need to know what God is providing, why He's providing it, is our heart right, and what is our purpose. Just a little bit deeper in Genesis, we find Joseph. God provided a lot here for Joseph. He sent Joseph dreams. He unfortunately put him in a family, and actually I shouldn't have said that. I should have said it like I have it written right here, because when I looked down and I read it like I have it written, I thought if I say that's going to sound stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway. He sent him dreams, and he sent him poor parents. His father was a mess. He did not know how to parent children. He picked favorites, he played favorites, and he turned all of his children against Joseph accidentally, doing what he did because he loved one woman, better than the other woman. So God even uses things like that in our life that sometimes we see as a negative, or we might think as a negative. As a child, we might even have issues as adults because of something that happened to us when we were younger. Bill and I had a quick conversation in my driveway Sunday, and Bill and I grew up a lot alike, and it's a wonder either one of us turned out halfway decent, because we have some of the same scars from childhood, and it can work in your favor or it can work against you. Now see, Joseph saw all of this. He didn't see any negatives at all. He was always extremely focused on God, no matter what He sent him, even when He sent him the dreams. And he knew what those dreams meant. He literally meant that he was over and going to be over. Not only his brothers, but basically everything and everyone. His older brother, God allowed his older brother to sell him into slavery. Went to Egypt. Think about that. God was providing and taking one of His men, sold him into slavery, sent him to Egypt to prepare a place for the entire Jewish nation that Abraham was the father of, and ballooned into millions of people. He provided a safe haven in Egypt through Joseph. That was the beginning of Him protecting the Jewish people. And we're going to find out in a minute that actually He did that through slavery. God used that to protect His people. It wasn't a negative. They saw it as a negative. He was literally protecting them from the surrounding areas and the pagan and barbaric people around. And He knew that by taking Joseph into Egypt, He was preparing His people to be taken into captivity and actually protected for 400 years. God provides for His people in very different ways than we think that He might. Especially our nation now, we're a little spoiled, and we don't think of things like this as being provision. And then, like I said, God provided slavery. He provided Potiphar. He provided prison time. He provided a baker, a cupbearer, and a Pharaoh for Joseph to become the man that He wanted Joseph to be. And Joseph knew exactly what God was doing. And he knew that God would bring about everything that He had shown him, because when he passed, he literally put it in writing that when God delivered His people, take me with you. He was ready. He was in a coffin and mobile and ready to go. And we know that he went. When Moses went, and that's where we're going next. We'll go right on into Exodus to Moses. Moses is another, basically a tragic story. We've got a Pharaoh who's taking out every male child in Egypt of the Jews, and getting rid of every one of them, because he has heard there's a deliverer coming. We know that was Moses. Moses was born into slavery, literally, marked for death, orphaned, and adopted by royalty. Pretty much in about a 3-year span of time. We're not exactly sure how long they were able to hide him, but all of that took place in that amount of time. And then the Bible jumps forward about 40 years, and we find Moses as a prince of Egypt, and maybe feeling a little bit more elevated than he should have been, maybe thinking a little more of himself than he should have. And there's an incident where he kills another Egyptian. He hides it, thinks he's hidden it. The next day, he's called out by some of his own people, and then he knows that it wasn't hidden, and now he's marked for death again. Pharaoh is going to take him out again. So he runs. So now he's a fugitive. God provided another small nation and a sort of a king there over this area of Midian. And he takes Moses in, makes him a shepherd, we know, for another 40 years. And then, of course, God shows up and asks him to go back and deliver his people. And all of a sudden, Moses went from a prince who was a little overconfident and a little cocky to, I'm nobody, I can't do that. Has God ever asked you to do something and you said, I can't? I'm going to go out on a limb and say a lot of us may have done that. I've done that on a couple different occasions. God made the comment to Moses when Moses used one of his excuses was, I can't speak. And God said, who made your lips? See, there is nothing that God can ask us to do for Him that He is not going to equip and do through us. It's not about us. It's not about our ability. God didn't come and ask me to do anything because I'm just that amazing. That's not why He does it. Not why He did it. God wants to be able to speak through His people to His people. God sent Moses. He sent him Aaron to do the speaking, more or less, and provided the cloud and the fire, the deliverance. He provided Joshua, which was basically his second in command. And we know where that was leading up for another 40 years, where that goes. So God is always providing for the task that He has for us. So remember what I said when we started. Keep thinking back about everything that God has provided. We talked a little bit about this in Sunday school. And I've kind of been doing a little bit of reflecting and looking backwards because I got saved when I was 32 years old, right here, standing right there in this church. And I can go back literally to my childhood, and now I can see where God was working and what He was doing, and the people that He was putting in my life that were Christians, that had been provided things. And the thing about it, they'd been provided things that I needed. And I didn't know it at the time. But I can look back now and I can remember those people and the input that they had in my life. And God had provided what they needed for me. See how that works? So you see where we're going with the application in just a minute? We have the calling to make a difference in other people's lives, whether they know it or not. We make a difference if we're obedient. We just spoke about Joshua just a little bit. God provided a wonderful apprenticeship under Moses. We know that Joshua came up through the ranks, took over when Moses died. God gave Joshua the promise that I will be with you as long as you live. I will never leave you or forsake you. Joshua, you can really read about Joshua in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, of course, the entire book of Joshua, and then some into Judges. I think you'll find where he passes. So there's a lot about Joshua. Some of the many different things that are taking place in all of these different people's lives. Think about one of the very particular things, and it sort of goes back to what I just said about the people in my life that were feeding stuff into my life. Why would God use a harlot? And we know that's a biblically clean word. We know what word we would use if we weren't in this building in Burke County. That's what she was. She was a harlot, okay? She wasn't a good person. She just was not. Why would God provide someone like that and put her in Joshua's life? There was a reason for that. She was the only person in Jericho who, when she saw the spies and heard who they were and the God they served, she's the only one that believed. So God used her. And that's what's so amazing. And now think about it. You can go back into Chronicles and you will find that young woman not only believed and helped those spies, she was spared, and she ended up in the bloodline of Jesus. Jesus is great, don't know how many greats, grandmother. See, now that's how God works. God uses people that most of the time we wouldn't make eye contact with or even speak to, because God sees the heart. Not what they do for a living, where they live, how they talk, or anything like that. God looks at the heart. So it's important that we see that. She was actually the mother of Boaz. And we're going to get to that a little bit later when we get into Ruth, when we talk a little bit about Ruth, because that's where Boaz pops up. And Rahab was his mother. And we know how all that takes place with Ruth, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then that leads forward to the genealogy. That springs us forward to King David. And then from there, it's from there to the cross. One more. In Judges, he's mentioned in Judges 6 and in Hebrews in the Faith Hall of Fame. Gideon. He provided oppression and fear. They're back in captivity. The Midianites have taken them into captivity. And when God comes to call on Gideon, he finds him hiding. in a wine vat, treading out grain for enough seed to make enough bread to get through another day. God, of course, calls him, and Gideon goes into this explanation of, I'm the least of the least, the smallest of the smallest tribes. You sure you got the right guy? And I don't think it's me. And God calls him a mighty warrior or a valiant warrior. He provided an army. He provided spies. He provided victory. And he provided a legacy. And you can find that legacy in Judges chapter 8, verse 22. You will see that Gideon was blessed beyond measure with just an incredible family and a lineage of children because of the condition of his heart and what took place there. Samson's in Judges. We know Samson's story and everything that God provided for him. He literally set him apart from birth. And we know Samson made a few mistakes also, but God still had a purpose for him. And even in the end, he was able to achieve God's purpose. And if you'll just think about all these people as we're going through them, every single one of these people were pointing others to God and towards the cross. But as far as the Old Testament, they were pointing everyone that they encountered to God, and they were very committed and lived it out in such a way that even people knew them when they came into different towns, who they were and the God they served. Of course, the whole book of Ruth and the story of Ruth and Naomi and her two sons and both the daughter-in-laws, and of course we know that story when Naomi decides to go back to Bethlehem. One daughter-in-law decides just to go home. Ruth refuses to leave Naomi, even though she was not a Jew by birth, but she believed that this woman had something that she did not have, and she went with her, and she had no husband. She had no way of getting a husband. Naomi was her mother-in-law, and Naomi was out of sons. She could not even provide a son. And they find a field. We know that story. They're gleaning, and the field ends up belonging to Boaz. And see how everything's connecting? You go all the way back to Joshua and the harlot. And she's married into the Jewish community, and she has a son named Boaz, and he's grown up and he's very successful, very wealthy, owns a lot of fields, a lot of land. And Naomi tells Ruth what to do. And long story short, Ruth and Boaz end up being married. And of course, Obed is their son, the father of Jesse, the father of King David. So see how everything that God is doing is connected, and it means something always. Of course, 1 Samuel chapter 16, David is anointed. We've talked about that just recently. He blesses David with favor, victory, strength. David is just this amazing young man. He believes so much in his God that literally nothing can stop him, not even Goliath that we talked about, or Gary talked about last week, and how all that took place. He even provided the son of the king that the Jewish people insisted on, that befriended David and actually took him into Saul's house, and so he was able to see everything that was taking place, and how he was being prepared for all of that to take place. He was the least of all of those sons that Jesse had. None of the others measured up. We see that David wrote the biggest part of the Psalms, some of Proverbs. We're not completely sure of all of the different things that were written there. Wrote a lot of songs. Most of the Psalms are songs, actually. We read them, but most of them were to music because David was a musician. His son, Solomon, God provided wisdom, favor, wealth, and all of the different things that took place there. We know that actually Solomon was another son that David and Bathsheba had after the incident that took place in David's life, where David had a lapse in judgment, and then God comes back and blesses him with a son, and we know that that son was able to go on and, of course, build the temple and do amazing things. Elijah literally just pops on the scene in 1 Kings chapter 17. He just pops up out of nowhere. I mean, it's just like all of a sudden, you got Gary Towery, Wilson Road, the prophet. No warning, don't know where he came from, don't know how he knows what he knows. God prepared him. God called him, and he answered. I mean, and literally his first task was to go and talk to one of the meanest and most ruthless leaders in that particular area, and he did. He just time and time again was constantly going up against Ahab and taking on him and all of his prophets and everything that took place there. So God is always providing. What's He provided for you? Who has He provided for you? Take a quick look at Isaiah and Jonah. Very different prophets. I called Jonah a prophet. He was a prophet, but he definitely tried not to be. Isaiah, God provided a call. God called Isaiah. What did Isaiah say? Here I am. I'm right here. Send me. I'm here. What do you need? Totally different than Jonah. He calls on Jonah. We'll contrast them a little bit. He calls on Jonah, tells Jonah what he wants him to do. He said, I need you to go to Nineveh. There's at least 120,000 pagans there. I want to save them. I want to save them all. Out the door he goes. No way. No way. I hate those people, and I don't want to see them saved. Very, 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 very different. Here's the question I asked a while ago. Have you ever said no to God? God provided a call. He provided a mission. He provided a storm. He provided a fish. Jonah ends up laying on the beach with his face in the sand. And what's God ask him to do? The same thing He asked him to do before he ran. It didn't change. You cannot run from God, and you can't tell God no. It just don't work. So he got the same call, and then he went. But we know the story there a little bit. He still bucked a little more, but between there and getting back to Nineveh, he gets a little bullheaded again, and he still doesn't want to do it. But God kept providing what he needed. A drink in the sun. Taking shade away while he's in the sun. Showing him how much God loved the Ninevites. And I'm doing this for you, and I want to do it for them. That was the mission. That was the mission completely. Move just a little bit further into the Bible, and we run across Daniel. We know that story. They're taken into captivity again. You've got these young men who are devout. They believe what they believe. You have to believe that, because we're not real sure what happened to their parents. If their parents were taken into slavery, the popular thinking is the parents were killed, and that's why they took the children into slavery. We don't really completely know. They could have been taken into slavery also, but we're not sure. But what you do see is those parents did a pretty good job raising those boys. There's 4 of them there, four boys, and they're pretty solid. They're pretty solid. They rarely slipped up. God provided safety, favor, elevation in the government, in their jobs, and they never wavered in their belief or their witness, even to the point that even the king was tricked into literally trying to eliminate all of them. He was manipulated into that. None of it ever worked. And actually he ended up even admitting that Daniel's God was the one true God. But it came... Have you noticed how most all of these people, while God's providing all of this provision, whatever type of provision it might be, most all of them are in a negative situation? Or a lot of them are. You ever found yourself in a negative situation and you just wonder, why in the heck is this happening? I mean, have you ever shook your fist at God and said, why? Really? This is what you're going to do? It's normal, actually. I've done it. God knows that in those times, we have nothing else to rely on but Him. And that's what He's looking for. And that's why He comes and He provides what we need when we need it the most. And it still comes back to our heart. Our heart has to be in the right place, in the right condition. We'll jump into the New Testament real quick, and then we'll get things wound down, and then I want to do a little bit of application. 12 disciples. You all know them. 11 of them turned out pretty decent. 1 went bad. But God provided a Savior. God provided a mission, a calling from that Savior. He provided training. We know that there was at least 3 years of on-the-job training with Jesus. And that's amazing. He provided power, wisdom, knowledge, and persecution. There it is. Persecution. Why would He provide persecution for 12 people that He just called to follow Him? Because it's where their best witness shined. Because they never turned. Our next two people are Saul and Paul, which is the same. We see the same thing. What's Paul doing when he's in prison in stocks? Now, they didn't have him in handcuffs, sitting in a chair in a prison like you see today. He was in the deepest part of the prison, down in the bottom, probably a lot of rats, a lot of water, a lot of just not a good place. And they were in either stocks or chained in such a way that they were literally contorted. It wasn't what we see today. What were they doing? They were doing what Kayla would be doing. She'd just be singing up a storm about the Lord. And that's what they did. God opened the doors of the prison. Nobody left, not even the other prisoners. You know the story about the jailer and what took place there. He immediately was going to take his own life because he just knew the prisoners were gone. And from the darkness down deep, Paul said, "Don't do it. We're all still here." See, the persecution was for a reason. It wasn't about Paul. It was about what God knew Paul would do in the midst of the persecution, because in the very next verse we find out that the jailer and his whole house came to know the Lord. There it is. See, God's okay with allowing a man whose heart is sold out on Him to be persecuted just a little, to save a man who's destined to burn for life in eternity, and his entire family, for them to be saved. See how the persecution's sort of starting to take a different look? It's a little different when you think about it like that. Paul gave up a little physical, mental, emotional for an entire household to be in eternity now. They're there and waiting. And we'll see that family one day. See how all that's starting to come together now, and how you sort of sometimes you wonder why. Why is this happening? Why me? Stop looking at yourself and look around. God's doing something around you, trying to bring His Son into someone's life. That's where we got to get to begin to think and see and understand, because God is renewing our mind through all of this, all of these things that He has provided for all of those people. Now we're going to jump into each other real quick. We've got 7 minutes. Look back over your life and think about everything that God has provided, even what God provided that you didn't know He was providing through someone else into your life, to bring you to the point of salvation and to the point that you are right now, sitting right here in Warlicks Baptist Church, and God is still providing things that you need on a daily basis in order to make a difference in the world for Him. So if we take everything we've talked about, and I know I've rambled on and I've talked about a lot, but if we put all that together and bring it down to something that we can apply to our lives, God desires to see the lost saved. It's that simple. It comes down to that. Each one of these stories and these people that we talked about here on these papers all had the same outcome. God was made evident to the people around them, and God was able to move His kingdom and grow His kingdom forward and make a difference. So, what has God provided for you to prepare you for this moment, right now? This is your time, right now. Who has God prepared for you to share that with? There's someone out there. You may not know it yet. You may not meet them till tomorrow or Friday, maybe Saturday at B&B. I don't know. Maybe your first day at Iron Station. Someone will be there. And God will have provided you with something that they need. When I used to take my kids to school, Monty had a daycare, so I always took the kids to school, but I worked right beside the school anyway, so it wasn't that big a deal. I would tell the boys when they would get out of the car, I'd say, listen, look, and learn. I don't know why I said that. It just sounded good. I had no idea how to be a parent. I really didn't. I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what I was doing. I was really making it up as I went along, flying by the seat of my pants. Truly. I had no clue. It just sounded good, and I said it every morning. And it just kind of stuck. And I actually have it wrote on this paper. It actually applies to us as Christians. The lost are everywhere. So we need to pray to see, to see how God sees. Remember the harlot? Or a homeless person, if you want to bring it into today. We see them differently. God sees them differently. We have to see how God sees people. Pray to see as God sees. Pray to speak as God speaks. So we can be mean. We can be mean sometimes. If we're having a bad day, I mean, we see it happen all of the time. We let circumstances of the day affect us too much. We can walk through the door, and my wife can look at me wrong, and it's on. But it shouldn't be on, because she didn't do anything. I don't know what kind of day she had. I know what kind of day I had. Wasn't good. Here's the catch, though. Just because I had a bad day doesn't mean that I didn't have a good day. Look at all these people, for heaven's sakes. I've never experienced persecution or anything close to this. And I'll be honest with you, I've never had a bad day that was anywhere near this bad. Do you see what I'm saying? Sometimes we make things worse than they are. Learn to see like God, learn to speak like God, and learn to love like God. Because we don't do so good at that love thing sometimes. And see, that goes back to our heart, and that's what God's looking for. Because any time that your mouth gets you in trouble, you got a heart issue. All right? That's a telltale sign. Something spills out of your mouth, something's not quite right. You're not dealing with something, or you're carrying something around you shouldn't be carrying. God's always showing us and preparing us to be the people that we need to be. And if we do all of these things and pay attention to what He's doing, pay attention to what He's brought into our life, our whole life, and especially what He's doing right now, then you will find that you have become like these men and women in the Bible. See, when Jesus left, He said, "Greater things than these you will do." You know what He meant by that, right? Greater things than I have done, you will do. Sounds weird, doesn't it? Doesn't make good sense. Think about it. Jesus raised the dead back to life. Jesus came back to life. Jesus gave you the power to share the gospel with someone and save an eternal soul from damnation. Don't get me wrong, but to me that's greater than raising a physically dead person back to physical life to die again. I'm not making light of that. I'm trying to explain to you the power He gave you. You have the power to save a soul from death. We're talking about a soul, not a physical body. That's what He meant. He gave you the gospel. So you have become an instrument of provision and favor. I mean, think about it. You literally carry the gospel, something that can save a soul from hell or eternal salvation. That's favor and that's provision. You've been provided with the greatest gift ever given. I guess my application and my challenge to you is, to whom are you going to share it with? They're there. They're all around us. I don't even have to look for them. I mean, one just come walking in my shop today about 8 o'clock. Just walked right through the door. I was like, hey, that works. We all, me, Jordan, Kurt, we're friendly. We try to love on everyone. It's important, guys. All of these, like I said, all of these men and women were provided with extremely specific and special things for a very specific task. Your one task is the Great Commission. Share the gospel, save a soul. It's that simple. And you've been given every single thing you need, which is the Holy Spirit, because you accepted Jesus Christ. You don't have to bring anything to the table. You don't have to know nothing. You don't have to come up with something smart or a special word. You just have to be willing to live it out in front of other people. And when God shows you and you recognize that, God does it all. And He'll do that for each and every one of you. If we just focus on that one thing. Life is simple, guys. As a Christian, we got one calling, not 100. Now, we're all busy. We got jobs, we got bills, we got things vying for our time. But as Christians, we got one thing to do. Focus on that every single day, and I'm telling you, everything else will fall in place. May not fall in place like you want it to, and it may not fall in place in that just the right time. But it will be fine, as long as you're focusing on the one true call that we all have. I'm 5 minutes over. I'm sorry. I knew that would happen. I appreciate everybody being here. Any comments or questions? Just remember your call. One thing. It's all that's important. The rest of the stuff is too, but it's okay. The one thing is what matters. Be busy. Be who you are. Do what you do. Go where you go. But always remember the one thing. That's what's important. That's how God gets it out there and grows the kingdom. He's not just sitting on the altar here waiting for them to walk through that back door. He's equipped you to go out the back door and grow His kingdom for Him. That's how it works. So do that. Do that. Comments or questions? I'll pray us out of here before we get in trouble.
I was reading an article by a pastor from the 1940s. He had a little book. He said the one thing that most Christians have the hardest thing doing